invite you all to take a moment to check in with your heart. How are you feeling? How's your body feeling? Are there any thoughts spinning in your head? Or are you right here with me? Whether you're feeling joyful and at peace, or angry, or despairing, or just grumpy, I invite you to let yourself feel however you feel. This morning, I'm going to be talking about breaking through to joy. And so often, I want to really dance this fine line because I don't want to imply that there's something wrong with feeling any other way. There are good reasons to feel lots of different ways. And there's an opportunity to access joy even with whatever we're feeling. So I'm going to be talking about ways to possibly access joy even with whatever else you might be feeling. Sometimes it can seem like joy might be on the other side of an impermeable barrier, known as an ideal or maybe as a memory, but not an accessible reality of life. Today, I say that breaking through to joy is all about courage. It's about the courage to connect, the courage to slow down, and the courage to be. Will you do that with me? The courage to connect, the courage to slow down, and the courage to be. Amina Matthews stood in the street surrounded by young men who were raring to fight. Hijab on her head and authority in her voice. She's known as an interrupter. She preaches a street sermon, sharing her own criminal past and calling on the men to be role models for the younger kids. She pulls one of the younger kids from the crowd and asks, if this young man ends up with a 100-year sentence, who will be to blame? Who will be to blame? A few of the men present are willing to admit that it would be their fault from their role modeling. And she demands their commitment to do better, to be better. While the young men were ready to fight one another, this time, from her words and her presence, they calm down and walk away without a fight. Efforts to diffuse violence in her neighborhood on the south side of Chicago don't always go so well. People feel they have to defend their honor at any cost. Fleeing is seen as weak, and freezing could get one killed. So fighting seems to be the only option that's left. But these violence interrupters bring a different strategy, one of connection. They have the courage to connect. Now, obviously, connection isn't all of their work, but it's the foundation that underlies their work. Successful violence interrupters are able to intervene because they have credibility in the neighborhood from that connection, because they're able to speak the language of the people, and because they have the courage not to fight, not to flee, not to freeze, but to connect to those who need it, to those whom others see as too dangerous to engage. Most of us here are fortunate to live not in a constant fear of violence. If you are living in fear of violence, please contact me. Please be in touch with me or one of the pastoral associates. We want to be of support. But fortunately, most of us have much lower stakes. It's a matter of wanting to avoid conflict or rejection, wanting to avoid tension or emotional pain. It's easier to write someone off as unchanging or to assume that your crush wouldn't say yes to a date. But where's the joy in that? Where's the joy in living like that? There's not. Courage is necessary on the path to joy. There's no lasting courage. There's no lasting joy without courage. This is simply part of the human condition. Courage is often the access way that leads us to joy. Trauma expert Dr. Gabor Mate says that safety is not the absence of threat. It is the presence of connection. And isn't that what brings so many of us here? What has so many of us engage with this community? Whether it be in this community or in your family or friendship circles, who is it that you could connect with that would make a difference? Is there a conversation you've been avoiding having? If so, again, I invite you to contact me or one of the pastoral associates. We'd be glad to talk you through having that conversation and be of support in any way we can be. Perhaps there's been somebody on your mind who you haven't talked with in a while. Might you reach out? What do you have to lose? Might it be worth that loss? Even if it doesn't go as we'd hoped, there's often another opportunity to try again. Even if it doesn't go as we hoped, we can find joy in knowing that we had the courage to try. And often I find that there are unexpected blessings just in trying. It can be kind of an opportunity for curiosity and experimentation. So again, breaking through to joy is all about the courage to connect, to slow down, and to be. So moving on to slowing down, ironically enough, Catherine May was out enjoying her 40th birthday celebration, a party with friends. And you know what? It got interrupted by somebody calling to say that her husband needed to go to the hospital. He was sick, very seriously ill, in fact. But out of that experience, she then came to realize that she had some chronic health issues that she'd been kind of ignoring. And then their young son became too anxious to be able to even go to school. So they were all dealing with their own mental and physical health issues. Now, I know many of us have experienced times in life when what we really need is to rest. And that seems like the last thing we can possibly do, because there is so much going on and so much that it seems like needs our attention. But Catherine May and her husband decided that they were going to have the courage to slow down. They changed their work situations. They took their son out of school. And by taking that time to rest, their whole family was able to gain a sense of recovery and be able to heal and move on. She writes about this in her book, Wintering. This is a really common, if you look at the world's religions and you look for common themes, the idea of rest being important is something you'll see in many. In the Judeo-Christian traditions, we have the idea of Sabbath. In a more contemporary Christian context, there's the idea of too busy not to pray. And I've heard from Buddhist practitioners that if you're too busy to meditate for 1 hour a day, then you should be meditating for 2 hours a day. The times are urgent, so we have to slow down, says Bayo Okomafole. Again, breaking through to courage, breaking through to joy. It's about connection, slowing down, and being. Perhaps you're familiar with Parker Palmer's work. Who's ever read or heard of something from Parker Palmer? A few folks, yeah. So he's a Quaker. He's a writer. He was an academic. He's one of the founders of the Center for Courage and Renewal. So coming from a Quaker tradition, and his book, A Hidden Wholeness, talks about his own search for what's true for himself and how he tried to go the academic route, and it really just wasn't for him. And he kept trying, and he kept trying, and he kept trying. But in Quaker terms, there's this idea of way opening. Have you heard of this? So way can close, and way can open, and sometimes if you're feels like you're just beating against a door that's not opening, maybe that's not the door for you to go through. That's their perspective. You know, other people have the perspective of, no, persistence is the way to be successful in life. But the Quakers look for a way opening, and that's the perspective that Parker Palmer comes from. He says that afraid that our inner light will be extinguished, or that our inner darkness exposed, we hide our true identities from each other. In the process, we become separated from our own souls. We end up living divided lives, so far removed from the truth we hold within that we cannot know the integrity that comes from being what you are. So it's a great book. I highly recommend it. And another one you may want to check out is theologian Paul Tillich's The Courage to Be, which talks about how it's both important to be in community with other people and also to be grounded in your own individuality and your own values and authenticity. So again, the courage to connect, the courage to slow down, and the courage to be. This week, some of us and many of our neighbors will be celebrating Christmas. Now, all evidence points to Jesus having been born in the spring, but there are reasons why we celebrate, why it landed on our calendar that December 25th was the day to celebrate the arrival of the Christ child. One of the reasons is the co-occurrence of the winter solstice, which also happens this week, although earlier. As the earth spins round the sun, light overtakes darkness, and darkness overtakes light in this seemingly endless dance. This newborn baby, the Christ child, represents hope and faith in light returning. Christ's birth also represents the promise of reconciliation, repairing the connection between God and humankind. There's plenty of things about Jesus' life that are debatable, and honestly, plenty that's not even debatable because there's not enough information to have an honest debate. But it's clear to me that the power of the story of Jesus' life is in his courage. His courage to connect, to slow down, and to be. Jesus had the courage to connect with people, all sorts of people. He connected with fishermen, he connected with tax collectors, sex workers, the pious and self-righteous Pharisees, the people who wanted to change their lives, people who wanted him dead. He engaged with people on values and the issues that mattered. Jesus had the courage to slow down. Have you seen the BBC documentary about the theory of Jesus being a Buddhist monk? I find this fascinating. So, an important aspect of Buddhism is reincarnation. And when a Buddhist Lama or spiritual leader dies, some wise leaders go off in search of the child in which that Lama that died became reincarnated. And they have ways to test that young child to see if that's really the reincarnated Lama. So the proposal laid out in this documentary is that the wise men from the East who came looking for Jesus were Buddhists who found their reincarnated Lama in the son of a Jewish carpenter and convinced the parents to allow them to take the boy for training when he was about 10 years old, when he got a little bit older. Now, the Christian Bible, as you may know, has this big gap. We know there's stories about Jesus' childhood up to a point, around 10 or 12. And then we have this big gap, and we come to having stories of Jesus as a young man in his 30s. And so the proposal is that during that time in between, Jesus was studying in a Buddhist monastery. And the proposal goes on to claim that Jesus may have used Eastern medicinal practices to appear dead on the cross, but never actually died, and did actually go back to what is present-day Kashmir to continue teaching and healing for many years to come. So if you want to check out more about those ideas, you can check out, all you have to do is Google BBC documentary, Jesus as a Buddhist monk. Now, whether you appreciate that theory as much as I do or not, it's clear that he knew how to slow down. When he was being pressed for an answer to a trick question with potentially dangerous consequences, he took his time, stick in hand, drawing in the sand, looking down, until he had an answer. When surrounded by a crowd wanting his attention, he slowed down enough to be attentive to those around him. He wasn't too busy for children, but rather said, "Let the little children come to me." And he was known for spending significant time alone in prayer, despite the demands that others had on his time. And when there was nothing left to do, when he was being persecuted for his convictions, when people were coming to torture and kill him, he had the courage to be. He had the courage to be true to himself and true to his values. Now, death will come for us all. And many of us have experienced and will experience again times when we cannot do what we once could do, when we cannot hold the positions we once held, when we cannot pursue the dreams we once pursued. And then, in those times, we have to have the courage to just be. What I know from my little bit of experience with meditation is that if I have the courage to be with whatever feelings and thoughts and sensations are arising in my experience, I will also find a sense of joy and peace, of vitality even, that is present. Many of the stories of Jesus portray him as confident and seemingly fearless. First, it's often the case that courageous people appear fearless to onlookers. Unfortunately, though, it's easy to think that courageous people are somehow special with their lack of fear. But in reality, it's not the absence of fear, but rather the awareness that there's something else more important. If you're at a place in your life where you don't know what that thing is that's more important than fear, I invite you to use hope. Use hope to overwhelm the fear. As we have faith that light will return and the days will begin to grow longer this week, I invite you to try out having faith that joy will return, that joy is available to you, that having courage will help you find it, will give you access to it. Breaking through to joy is all about having the courage to connect, to slow down, and to be. And remember that you have this community to support you in that courage. Let's work to be courageous together.